We have two members of the public wishing to speak for Call to the Public. The first is Laurel Langmaid. Laurel, are you on the line?
Yes, I'm on the line.
Please proceed.
I would like to bring attention to the minutes of September 8th, where Councilwoman Asari talked about research that demonstrates possible negative impacts of hiring from the military due to cultural differences. Ms. Asari, you're a well-educated woman, and I don't know where you got this data, but it certainly is biased. I served in the military for over 25 years, and I learned that it's not the individuals with a military background bringing military tactics to the Phoenix police. It is the Phoenix police who could be bringing military tactics to these individuals. Military teaches commitment, following orders, working as a team member, duty, honor country, and I recognize that maybe your biases on wanting to leave the state are based on your youth and inexperience. With that being said, I want to let you know that I'm part of the Madison Pioneer Neighborhood Coalition, and I just want to bring your attention to the crime where we desperately need police in and around the Human Services campus. I'm going to read you the crimes that happened just around that area. On Monday, October 11th, aggravated assault with a knife, criminal damage, aggravated assault, burglary, third degree, commercial building, criminal damages, theft. Starting Sunday, October 10th, aggravated assault, knife, robbery, unlawful use of means of transportation. Saturday, October 9th, aggravated assault, robbery. Friday, October 8th, criminal damage, aggravated assault, knife, burglary, second degree, residential attempt forcible entry, burglary, third degree, fenced yard, criminal damage, indecent exposure. Thursday, October 7th, burglary, third degree, aggravated assault of an officer, dangerous drug violation, theft of means of transportation. Wednesday, October 6th, possession of weapon by prohibited person, aggravated assault.
Thank you. Our next caller is John Forsyth. John, are you on the line?
Before we begin with John, Councilwoman Ansari has a comment.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I appreciate the call and did absolutely not mean, I just was trying to ask questions about our recruitment tactics. I am equally concerned that we have a staffing shortage, so I just want to emphasize my commitment to our public safety officers and really appreciate the feedback, and have met with the Madison Pioneers group and recognize the issues there as well, and look forward to working with you on them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Our next speaker.
Mr. Forsyth is not on the line. That concludes public comment.
Thank you so much. So we'll move to the first item of business, minutes of our meeting. Do a motion?
Move to approve.
A second? Okay. Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. I have a motion for consent items 2 and 3.
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve consent items 2 and 3. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. Move on to item 4, Phoenix Police Department Hiring and Recruitment Monthly Report.
Chairwoman, this item is for information only, and some of the information will be contained in the conversation and presentation that we give later in the meeting. Thank you.
Madam Chair, may I say something?
Yes, Councilman.
Normally, this would be an excellent item, but it does look like it might be a little bit redundant given the information in the presentation for a subsequent item. So as long as we can ask questions about the hiring at that time, I'm fine with this being information only. Thank you.
Okay, so we will move on to item 5, the inspection, testing, and maintenance report, system for fire and life safety compliance, an update.
Morning, Chairperson O'Brien and members of the subcommittee. I'm Executive Assistant Fire Chief Scott Walker, and I'm here today to provide the subcommittee with a report on the Brycer Compliance Engine system. So as a reminder, this is the system and solution we put in place in January of 2020, just before the pandemic began, to help the fire department better manage the annual requirement that all fire and life safety systems here within our city are being tested and functioning properly. So to begin, I wanted to provide just a little information about fire prevention efforts and what they really are for us. So fire prevention is one of the 3 major components of the American Fire Service. It is really our effort to try to prevent the emergency from ever happening. Second component would be our public education and community outreach programs. This is where we're trying to educate the community and our residents on how to help themselves if they have an emergency. And then the third function is what we're most known for, is our response, our emergency response. When the first 2 fail to completely resolve the emergency, we will respond to take care of that for them. Simply put, fire prevention is proactively protecting the community through enforcement of the fire code. One of the major components of the fire prevention efforts is the annual inspection and testing requirement that's within the fire code. This requires that all fire life safety systems, these could be fire sprinklers, fire alarms, smoke control systems, large commercial hoods in a commercial kitchen, these type of systems be tested and are functioning properly every year. This is a key piece of our fire prevention efforts, as it is for all fire departments. So historically, this has been quite the challenge, not just for the Phoenix Fire Department, but really for the region and for the nation. As you can imagine, making sure that businesses are testing these systems and that we get that information can be quite a challenge. Why is it a challenge? Well, here in the city of Phoenix alone, and this does apply to all businesses, not just the city of Phoenix properties. So here in our community, we have over 36,000 commercial buildings that have at least one system. Some of these buildings, a large warehouse, a high-rise building, could have 8 to 10 systems. We have approximately 97,000 systems that require an annual inspection. As you can imagine, the staff time that would be required to ensure every year those systems are being tested and we're getting that information would be quite a daunting task. We really had no mechanism to ensure participation prior to Brycer. So the fire chief often says about trusting and verifying is important. Well, in this area was really trusting, and I hate to say, but really more hoping, because we just had no mechanism to know that, in fact, these systems were being tested out there. As you can imagine, this resulted in poor compliance with this requirement. Reports were submitted by paper, email, fax, certified mail, or dropped off in person. The picture on the right side of that slide is a stack of deficiency reports we would receive. These stacks would typically grow taller than we could keep up with our staff. Also, these reports are all in different forms, so our inspectors have to try to glean out the information, sometimes out of a 20-page report, what was really important in there. As you can imagine, this was a labor-intensive process. And simply put, failure to ensure this compliance equaled increased risk to our community. So I'm happy to say that what we are doing today is a much better option and is working for us. So the Brycer Compliance Engine, what it is it is an innovative IT-based software solution that is literally working 24/7, 365 days a year to ensure these testing and inspections are being performed. It tracks compliance on all systems, not just addresses. It automatically creates and notifies business owners of this responsibility. So briefly, the way it works is 30 days before the inspection and testing date is due, it sends a automatically generated letter to that responsible party to let them know they have a system that's coming up for a test. 30 days later, if that test is not completed, that system would be behind or overdue on that test. It will generate another letter to the responsible party. Now it sends a letter to the fire department letting us know we have a system that's out of compliance. 30 days later, if it still hasn't received a report, it sends another automatically generated letter to the responsible party and back to the fire department. At this point, we will engage and go out and find out why that test is not being done. Why we wait the 30 days is because we see significant compliance within that 30-day period. So the system is working for us without us having to really engage our staff to take care of it. It is working very, very efficiently for us. As you can imagine, this will ensure this process, this checks and balance process, ensures annual inspection is being achieved. Another benefit is we are receiving both compliant and deficient system reports. So what the system is looking for a report to check off that system has been tested, that fire life safety system has been tested. So we require the contractors that do these tests to send in both compliant and deficient reports. So this gives us a much better picture of really the safety of our buildings here within our community. As you can see, I hope, this is an extremely effective, efficient process, both from a technology perspective and a staff time and resource use. So what are the impacts of the Brycer Compliance Engine to our community and to the fire department? Well, this year alone, we received over 33,000 reports to date. Based on that, we are anticipating over 49,000 reports will be received for this calendar year. Compare that to just 3,000 reports before Brycer was in place. This is a 1,600% increase in the number of reports we are receiving now annually. And we do anticipate that 49,000 number will be reaching that 90,000 plus within the next 2 years. We have 194 contractors reporting to us. This is virtually all the contractors that work in this field. Compare that to prior to Brycer, about 25 contractors report to us, some more compliant or consistent than others, but you can see the significant increase, about a 400% increase there. We now can process a report in 6 minutes compared to 45 minutes before. So because it's a simple automated report that comes to us that we know what fields we need to look at, our inspectors, our staff can go through that and glean out any important information in about 6 minutes. Compare that to 45 minutes prior to Brycer. Forms were different. Some of them were 20-page reports that the staff would have to really try to glean through what was important. This is important because if we do identify a deficient system, we can have an inspector on site generally that day to address it. Why this is important is I know I've talked to many of you about businesses in your area. If we have an issue, is maybe that system, that location needs to be put on a fire watch to ensure the safety of our community. We can do that literally that day now with this process. Also, as I mentioned, we're both getting compliant and deficient reports, and we should be very proud of this, is we are seeing about an 89% compliant, meaning the systems are functioning properly, to about 11% deficiency. This is significant because across the nation, about a 50% deficiency compliant ratio is the normal. So our city is safer. This is something we should all be very proud of. And lastly, this system, we are anticipating when fully realized, will save about 10,000 staff hours every year. But based on the 49,000 plus this year, we will save over 5,000 hour staff hours by using this Brycer system. So in summary, we are proactively protecting our residents and firefighters with the Brycer system better than ever. We are utilizing an innovative technology to do that. We are maximizing our staff and our resources. We have a real-time premise profile of the City of Phoenix buildings. We know our buildings are safe to go in, whether it be our residents, our visitors, our employees that work in those buildings, or our firefighters that have to go in those buildings if they're on fire. We also wanted to point out this is a no-cost item to the city. So there is minimal cost. The contractors do pay a $30 fee to submit into the Brycer system. Half of that, or $15, comes to the City of Phoenix. That revenue is what is being used to fund the positions that manage the Brycer system for us. So finally, I can sit here and tell you that our community is safer with the Brycer system in place, and something we should all be proud of. So that does conclude my presentation, and before I take any questions, I'd like to just say that while I'm sitting here making this presentation to you, it really is the work of our fire prevention staff that have made this a reality and really brought this system online for us, and something we should all be proud of. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Chief. Council members, are there any questions? Councilwoman Ansari.
No questions, Madam Chair, just a couple of comments, if that's okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Wonderful. Well, I just wanted to congratulate Chief Walker on this. I think the fact that you're seeing 89% compliance and that we will save over 10,000 staff hours is really impressive and a great move by Phoenix Fire. I personally got a crash course in fire code violations this year when we had the extremely unfortunate Friedman fire in our district, which was the largest structural fire in Phoenix history. So I'm extremely grateful that the council took action in 2020 to support these measures and the steps that the department took this year to improve accountability efforts. We got an update from Chief Walker this last Friday about violations in District 7. And I just want to reiterate how thankful I am for your quick action there. And I think the businesses and more importantly, residents and neighbors in the area are grateful as well. So thank you for your work.
Thank you, Councilwoman Ansari, and thank you, Chief. It is impressive to know that our city has such a high rate of passing and that we are working to make this cost neutral to our community. Thank you for your time today. All right, we'll move on to item 6, remote civil traffic hearing pilot program.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. I'm excited to be here today to talk to you about one of our latest projects. You know, I will tell you that when I was appointed the chief presiding judge, I had more than a few crazy ideas in the back of the head, but one of them was that someday it would be really nice if what we were able to do would be to take the court out into the community. So particularly in a city as large geographically as Phoenix is, there's a lot of people who, for things like traffic tickets, have to come all the way downtown to engage with the court when they get citations. And I thought it'd be great if we were able to do something with satellite locations out around the city so that the public would be able to travel a much shorter distance in order to be able to take care of that. I quickly found that that was just really not feasible. Economically, it's very expensive, not something we were going to be able to do. But we like to say at the court that problems are gold, and you know, not many problems that have been bigger in the last several years in the pandemic. One of the opportunities that it presented us was the chance to leverage technology in sort of the new environment and leapfrog those crazy ideas that I had about satellite court locations, because I think what we're doing now, and we'll talk to you about, is the ability to take the court not just into your neighborhood, but to take the court into your home as you're out in the community. And I have with me today Judge Alicia Villa. She is the court's presiding hearing officer, and I will tell you also one of the state's leading expert when it comes to traffic law. She's sought out by judges across the state for her expertise in that area. She has led our civil division for a while quite ably, and she was instrumental in putting together this pilot that we're going to talk to you about. And so I'm going to turn this time over to her.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge Taylor. Good morning, Chairwoman O'Brien. I don't know if Vice Mayor Garcia is on the line or not, Councilman Waring, and also Councilwoman Ansari. It is my pleasure to be here with you today to highlight some of the new changes that we've made at the Phoenix Municipal Court with regard to our civil traffic cases, as well as to introduce you to our video hearing project. Now, before I go into the new changes that we've incorporated, I'd like to just give you an overview of where we have come from. So the traditional scheduling module for the court was not designed for convenience for the parties. What it required was multiple in-person appearances by individuals who were cited, even for something as simple as a civil traffic violation. When a person first receives their citation, they're given a court date, which is known as their arraignment. The arraignment is their initial appearance in the court. It is the date by which the individual must decide how they want to proceed with their case, whether they want to pay the fine, whether they want to dispute the charge, or if they want to take one of the alternatives that may be available, such as defensive driving class, or if they're charged with a documentary violation, such as not having insurance, they can come in and present their proof of insurance or their registration, depending on their charges. Now, our documentation that we would send to individuals always indicated that they must appear at court for that initial appearance. And although the court has always accepted written correspondence from individuals, most individuals were under the impression that they had to appear in court in order to indicate to us how they wanted to take care of their charges. So because of that, that resulted in hundreds of people coming to our courthouse every day, even for the simple task of asking for an extension for driving class or a new court date, whether for a new arraignment date or for a hearing. And so individuals would come in, they would go through security, they would be sent up to a courtroom, and they would wait to see a judge and then indicate how they wanted to take care of their case. For individuals who wanted to dispute their charges, they would be given a court date to come back for their actual hearing. Now, the hearings would be held again in person, so they would come back on another date. And not only would that individual be required to appear, but also the officer or officers who issued the citations. Again, this resulted in hundreds of people coming to our court building on every single day, simply on civil traffic matters. Now, if an individual was found responsible for a violation, but the judge felt that it was fair to give them an extension for sentencing, then they would be reset for sentencing so that they could bring back documentation. We frequently do this for people's benefit. For example, if they are found responsible for not having insurance, but they indicate that they are willing to purchase insurance, we will give them a date to come back so that they can show that they've gotten insurance and receive a reduced fine. We also do that when people are in the process of getting their vehicles re-registered or they're in the process of getting a driver's license. But again, that would require another trip back to the court for them to then show their documentation and receive their fine. So as you can see, this required multiple appearances by individuals coming to the court, even just to resolve one case. The need that we found with regard to finding alternative methods for people to appear was based on the experience that we've seen over the years of people indicating the difficulty that they have in appearing for court. Many people are unable to appear in court because they're unable to take time off of work. We have many people who are out-of-state residents who receive citations when they're here visiting Phoenix, whether for pleasure or for business. We also have students who are unable to miss school. So there's a lot of different factors that can go into the reasons why people cannot appear personally in court simply to address a civil traffic ticket. COVID-19 also brought this to the forefront because we had the period of time where the court was closed and we had to think of alternative methods so that people could address their cases. But also we had a lot of individuals expressing concern to us about appearing in public or appearing in groups, but they still wanted to be able to address their charges. So we established some new procedures. First of all, we eliminated unnecessary settings. We no longer hold arraignments in person for civil traffic violations. We advise people in the documents that they receive that they are not required to appear in person, and we give them the options that they have for disposition of their case. Most of our matters are handled by email or mail. People will correspond, send in their proof of insurance, send in their requests for hearings by email. We also allow individuals to request extensions by phone now, where we never did that before. So the in-person appearances for arraignments and also for sentencings are no longer required. Now, the one area where we still had to require some in-person activity was with the contested hearings, because in order for someone to participate in a contested hearing, they have to be able to be seen and heard by the judge. So we started the pilot program with regard to the video hearings on June 15th of 2021, because this was the only other aspect that allowed people to be able to see and hear and actively participate in their hearing without physically being present in the court. So our video hearing program is an opt-in program. It's very important that everyone understand that people are not forced to do a video hearing if they are not comfortable with appearing by video, if they are not technologically savvy, or if perhaps they do not have access to the technology or to internet. So if they are not interested in having a video hearing, then by all means they will still be able to have an in-person hearing. This is simply an option that is available to individuals. We send out simple instructions for individuals if they do want to participate in the video hearing. The video hearings are done through WebEx. and so they do have to download the application for that. Individuals are advised that they can contact the court prior to their hearing date so that their connection can be checked. We do have a video bailiff who has been trained in troubleshooting, and she's excellent at the ins and outs of WebEx. So she's been able to help not only our defendants, but also police officers who are having difficulty with accessing the equipment or with accessing the program. We also ask that individuals, both defendants as well as officers, submit any of their exhibits that they want to have presented during the hearing. We ask them to submit those beforehand, so they can either submit them by mail or by email, and that way the court has them. We can check them, make sure that if there's videos that they can be played, that there's in a format that can be played, and also to make sure that if they're photos or documents, that they can actually be seen and are clear. So if there's any difficulties with the exhibits, court staff will contact the defendant or the officer ahead of time to let them know, so that way everything is ready at the hearing, during the hearing. We've also produced an informational video, both in English and in Spanish, which explains the court procedure and the video hearing procedure for individuals. So this first slide is actually the opening slide that individuals would see when they first join the meeting, or when they first join the connection for the video hearing. It does give them the phone number for the bailiff in case they're disconnected, or in case they have any kind of issues while they are waiting for the hearing session to begin. The video hearing, the informational video goes through the procedure and gives general information about the hearing procedure. Also, again, advises them what to do in case they lose connection or if they have any issues. And it also goes through and step-by-step explains the hearing procedures, advising them how the judge will put everyone under oath, how the witnesses will be called, in what order they will be called, who gets to ask questions of who. These are all instructions that we would normally give individuals when they appear in court in person, but now they get them, not only do they see them here in the informational video, but we also have a voiceover so that they can hear the instructions as well. As I indicated, our video is completely translated into Spanish as well. We had one of our Spanish certified court interpreters not only translate the slides, but also do the Spanish voiceover for those individuals. And we do have the ability to have the hearings conducted with a translator as well through the use of WebEx. And this is again just showing you how the video is completely translated into Spanish for Spanish-speaking individuals. And this is a photograph of our actual video hearing proceeding. So as you can see, we are in our regular courtrooms. The judge takes the bench as normal, and we have a very large monitor there, similar to the setup you have here at council chambers, so that we can see all of the individuals, and then the individuals can also see me. We also have a camera which shows the courtroom, so that way people know that their hearing is private. There's no one else in the courtrooms. We don't have any live hearings scheduled at the same time that we have the video hearings, so that the hearings are safe and secure. So the benefits that we have found just in the 3.5 months that we've been conducting this pilot program is that this is more efficient for the public. It is a reasonable alternative for those people who are unable to physically appear in court. People don't have to take time off of work, or they don't have to take as much time off of work in order to attend their hearings. They don't have to deal with childcare. They don't have to come downtown, find parking, go through security, etc. They can actually hold their hearing from the comfort of their home or their office. The only thing I do require is I don't allow people to appear if they're driving. I do tell them to make sure that they pull over. I don't want anyone getting into an accident while they're on their video hearing. It does provide a more comprehensive court experience than other currently available legal options. The only other options that are alternatives would be either a documentary hearing, which is where an individual simply writes out their written statement of what their testimony would be. They present that to the court, as well as any exhibits they want to have considered, and then the court makes their decision just based on that. Obviously, with a documentary hearing, they're not able to participate in the hearing at all. The other alternative would be a telephonic hearing, but the limitation with telephone is obviously they would not be able to see any of the exhibits that are submitted, nor would they be able to see the other individuals that are testifying against them. Officers have also commented that they spend less time in court and away from their patrol areas by conducting video hearings, so they've been favorable with regard to the video hearings as well. And because this results in less people coming to the court building, this has resulted in less exposure risk and security risks for our staff. Now, with the video hearings, we've been sending surveys to all of our participants, officers, as well as defendants. Defendants have rated their experience, all of the defendants in their surveys have rated their experience as either satisfied or very satisfied. We've received many compliments for offering this option to individuals. Officers have also stated that appearing by video is convenient and allows them to return to duty sooner because they are not actually coming down to the court to actually testify. The police department has set up several different precincts with the equipment so that the officers can appear from the precincts in order to conduct their video hearings. And we've had a couple of cases where attorneys do represent individuals. In civil traffic, it's mostly self-represented individuals, but we do have attorneys appear occasionally. And the attorneys have also indicated that it's been a very convenient experience for them, and they have requested opportunities to appear by video in other types of cases, so criminal or orders of protection, et cetera. Okay. And with that, I would open the floor to any questions that you may have.
Madam Chair, I'd like to ask a couple questions.
Yes, sir, Councilman Waring.
Thank you. Judges, appreciate this program. You're going to use it, it sounds like, from a previous briefing, in about 3,000 cases a year where people actually protest their tickets. I think that was the number that I've been provided.
Madam Chair, Councilman Waring, yes. Last year, for example, we scheduled approximately 3,000 hearings in these types of cases. For right now, it is limited to civil traffic cases, but we do have the ability, as this goes forward, to scale it up into a couple of different case types, such as parking violations and perhaps some of the other civil cases that we have. But even just used in civil traffic cases, that's about 3,000 hearings a year.
Yeah. And really, just for the public watching at home, it's not really a time or staff savings for you all at the courts. It's really more of a benefit for the people participating. And we've all gotten tickets. I haven't had a ticket in a long time, but you get a ticket. You're being punished potentially if you're found guilty and everything. Obviously, you're protesting it in this case, but it's still a time investment. You got to drive downtown. You got to find parking. You got to, do everything that you need to do to get down here. Take time off of work. That was mentioned potentially as an issue. We're really trying to help the unhappy participants in this process make it at least a little less onerous and produce probably a little bit quicker result because you're not having to do everything face to face. Unfortunately, it doesn't really save time or money for the courts. This is really more a constituent, user-driven benefit. Is that a fair assessment?
Madam Chair, Councilman Waring, that's a very fair assessment across the board.
And to that end, I do appreciate that, because Judge, you and I have talked about this in other instances. Not everybody is online. Not everybody can use this. So you're still offering the same services for those who don't want to avail themselves of this or don't feel like it would be a benefit to them. I do appreciate that. I know at least one of the local sports teams went to all electronic tickets. That didn't go over well with some of their fans. I would have been one of those a year or two ago. I'm not very tech savvy either. I've now had friends sort of explain to me how some of this stuff works. So I'm better now, certainly since COVID. But bottom line, you don't have to use this system. But over time, to your point, Judge, and I think it's a good one, it's not just this pool of 3,000 potential cases, or roughly 3,000. You could expand this and use it in other areas as you perfect the system. As long as it's voluntary for those folks as well, I think that's a good use of time and money. So I appreciate the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Waring. Vice Mayor Garcia? You're on mute. No, try again.
Now you're definitely on mute.
I think it's the chambers.
There we go.
That good?
Yes, we can hear
All
you.
right. Thank you all. Thanks for the patience. Thank you, judges, for being here. We've all talked about the devastating impacts of the pandemic and what it's caused, and the crisis it's caused. But I think this system is showing the opportunities that we could build better systems. But one thing that concerns me, and you all have addressed it, is we've definitely also seen the impact of the digital divide and the folks that might not be able to access things. And so I'm wondering if there's ways where we can partner with other city departments, such as libraries or community centers, to maybe set up spaces where folks can have an individual room and maybe do a court hearing there. Kind of going into what the first thing you said, Judge Taylor, is now that this technology is available, the other side of it, just making a space available, might be easier to do. And so that's one suggestion. Maybe we can figure that out. I'm glad to hear about the translation piece and how that's going, but glad that that's happening. I really don't have any more questions. I think it's like usual, Judge, you are ahead of the curve in a lot of these issues. Just reminding you to keep that equity lens, remembering that there's a digital divide. Wondering, I guess one question I do have is, can folks access it just through a laptop, or can they do it through their phone? And then back to my earlier point, I think also there's resources out there. We just passed some funds to allow folks to check out laptops and hotspots from the library. So it might be something that you can also promote and let folks know that is available for them.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Mayor, that's a good point, and we have tried to be sensitive to the fact that we've all seen this digital divide happen right in front of our own eyes. One of the reasons that we went with the platform that we did, in fact, with WebEx, is it's scalable down and works quite well on mobile devices. So not only laptops, but smartphones. And one of the things we have found, and frankly, it has surprised me over the years, is that virtually everyone at every level does have smartphones. So to the extent that it works on that, it's broadly available. One of the things that we want to keep track of as we go through this, and since it is in a pilot phase, as we scale it up, is exactly what it means to the public. Because one of the things I don't want to see is, a benefit that really only exists for people who have the means to have, a great computer set up at home. So your suggestion about the libraries is a good one, and I actually did not know that we were letting people check out laptops. If they can check out laptops with hotspots, that's perfect, because they can take it and go. One of the opportunities we do have is, you'll recall that the council was instrumental last year in helping us get some money to be able to set up remote locations with both some private partners and some city spaces for people to seek orders of protection. And one of the things that is available in that is that those partners do have a private space. Because, obviously nobody wants to go to the library and sit in that great line with everyone around them while they have, their traffic hearing. But if there is a private space, as there should be at some of these locations, we want to see how well it would work to have those partners offer, your civil traffic hearing as well as coming in for a remote video order of protection. So there are some great points out there. We are keeping track of it, particularly as we scale this up so that it is large scale. We've talked about keeping that focus on it being really for the benefit of the public. As Councilman Waring said, this doesn't save us a whole lot of money, and it certainly doesn't save us any time. It really is about the benefit that it brings to the public, and we want to be sensitive to that.
Councilwoman Ansari.
Thank you. Not much new to add, but I also want to thank the judges on this program. I think it's really, really exciting. And as Vice Mayor Garcia said, I think the pandemic shed light on so many different inequities and barriers that people face. So the fact that this is being, this is very innovative, and the fact that this could be something that, Arizona or Phoenix kicks off, I think is quite impressive. And I look forward to supporting it in any way that I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Ansari. And I apologize. Vice Mayor Garcia, were you done with your questions and comments?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I would just like to reiterate my thanks for you all being so creative and innovative, and also touching a little bit on the ability for our constituents to conduct business with the court via phone and email, as well as this new video hearing. And as we get more information about this pilot, I look forward to the possibilities of expanding it. Judge, do you have any data on, are you tracking any connectivity issues that folks are having?
Madam Chair, we are, and I'll let Judge Villa speak to that because she's rather personally involved with it on a daily basis.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of this subcommittee. We have had some instances where individuals have had connectivity issues, and that's why we have the video bailiff who is trained specifically with our IT department in troubleshooting. So we've actually only had one instance where they went through all of the troubleshooting measures and simply were not able to resolve the issues. And so what we did was we simply continued the matter, and we asked the individual if they preferred to appear by video or if they had preferred to appear in person. That person elected to appear in person instead because he was having so many issues. But to address the Vice Mayor's question earlier, since I have been the judge who's presided over most of these video hearings, I can tell you that the majority of individuals who've been joining are joining by cell phone and do not appear to have any issues at all. Sometimes if they're in a low frequency internet or Wi-Fi spot, it may be difficult for them to be on camera at the same time as they are actually testifying. But then if they turn the camera off, then they appear to not have any issues. So we've been able to work around any kind of issues that have presented so far.
Excellent. Well, that's great news to hear. And once again, thank you for being on the forefront of making what is usually a very, what is not a happy situation a little bit easier for folks to deal with. So appreciate you all being here today. Okay, so we are going to move to item 7, the police department staffing discussion.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. As you see on the screen, we're going to be talking about staffing levels and impacts to the service of our community. We want to make sure that we keep in mind that we're victim-centric, which means if you're having the worst day of your life, you pick up the phone, you call 911, there's a dispatcher there that's going to answer that phone call. Secondly, an officer is going to respond, take your information, give that information to detectives and whomever else needs to follow up, to include crime scene techs, lab techs, and other folks. The detectives develop probable cause, and then they submit the case for prosecution after they apprehend the suspect. So it's going to be a very lengthy presentation, and we're giving this to you kind of in phases. So this would be our phase 2 of our staffing impacts, and Executive Assistant Chief Mike Kurtenbach is going to run the presentation. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Chief. Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, you'll see on this slide, as Chief Williams said, I'm going to cover a lot of information today, and obviously I welcome any questions either along the way or at the end. The topics that we're going to discuss are current staffing levels. This will be a refresh of what we discussed last month. Staffing trends, recruitment statistics, our new hires and our separations, emergency calls for service and response times, population growth, and caseloads. And caseloads is really going to speak to what the Chief just mentioned with our victim-centric focus on how we deploy our resources, and then our patrol deployment methodology and additional considerations. So with that, I'm going to get into current staffing levels. You may recall from last month's presentation or some individual briefings that I've done that our peak in November of 2008, we actually had 3,388 actual filled sworn positions. As of last week, we are at 2781 with 39 police recruits in the academy for a total of 2820. I say as of last week, we're at 2821, or 2781 total filled, because as of this morning, we're down 5 to 2776. Now, let me provide a little bit of context. I don't want anybody to think that that means that we have 2,776 uniformed, armed police officers that can go out on the street. If we look at the patrol division alone, and I'll get into it in this slide right here, which has a minimum patrol staffing of 1,096 officers. As of September 28th, we were already 42 below minimum staffing at 1,054. At any one time, we will have a neighborhood of 90 to 100 officers who are unavailable in patrol for a variety of reasons. It can be less than 30 days, it can be greater than 30 days due to injuries, and throughout the department, up to 125 officers at any one time that are unavailable below that count. I just want to make sure you had that context. Additionally, when we talk about how are we bridging this gap, we're going to be focusing on caseloads and our detectives earlier, but one way we're doing it right now is we're supplementing this shortcoming with specialty patrol, which means that there are 32 detectives every week, Monday through Thursday, that leave their current assignments. They go out into patrol in our 4 busiest precincts, those being Maryvale, Estrella Mountain, Cactus Park, Mountain View, and Desert Horizon, to help with that call-taking function, and we're also supplementing that with minimum staffing overtime.
Chief, before you go on, I have a quick question.
Yes, Madam Chair.
I noticed you have on here our 39 police recruits in the academy as the total filled positions, but do they have an impact on answering our 911 calls or assisting in investigations?
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, sadly they do not. And the reality is that these 39 police recruits are spread over 2 academy classes, 22 in one class, 17 in another. We are attempting to fill another academy class in December. Right now we have under 10 pre-hires for that academy class. Generally speaking, and our academy has evolved tremendously to be more successful in getting our recruits through, but we will lose a number of those recruits who will never even hit the street. But very specifically answering your question, no, they do not help us with responding to calls or any other function other than learning how to be officers as of right now.
And how long does it take before they are acting in those capacities?
The reality, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee, is from the time they start the academy to the time that they become solo capable officers usually tends to be in the neighborhood of 9 months to up to a year. And when I say solo capable, that's because after they finish the academy, then they go out and they complete their field training. We ensure that they have the requisite skill set and job knowledge to go out and do the job on their own. So it is a very lengthy process.
Thank you.
Next, going into staffing trends, it's important that you understand the timeline of how we got to where we are at today. So with that, I mentioned that at our peak, we were at 3388. The council has authorized and the budget will support a total filled sworn count of 3,125. We were trending toward that in March of last year, reaching 3050, as you can see in the slide, when there were a number of things that happened locally and nationally that directly impacted that number. And as you see moments in time, how that sworn count has gone down. And also, please take note of the total recruits that we have in the academy, how significantly that has dropped. From 124 recruits to, I just mentioned to you, 39 recruits in the academy as of today. And there's some other numbers that I want you to understand when we talk about our filled count as of today. There are 791 officers currently on the department, myself being one of those, so officers of all ranks, who are retirement eligible. That is as of last week. In addition, through the first 9 months of this year, we had 193 officers separate from the department, as you see there. If we were to project that out, that's just over 21 officers per month. In a future slide, you're going to see that we're trending toward losing 257 actually filled sworn positions by the end of this year. What's even more alarming is that over the first 3 months of this fiscal year, just June, July, and August, we had 94 officers separate from the department, only 32 of which actually retired. So that means they left for reasons other than retirement. They're leaving early.
May I ask a question?
Please do so.
Chief, so March 2020 was right when, COVID took full blossom, and you had 124 recruits. Obviously, it's dropped precipitously since then. Are you attributing any of this to COVID and problems with getting the message out about being a police officer? Are there other factors that you feel might be involved? I'll just say I think media coverage of police officers in general, and frankly, the way I think we as a council sometimes treat our employees also is a factor. But I'm wondering if just as a practical matter, were you unable to reach potential recruits because of the virus?
Madam Chair.
With open houses and that kind of stuff.
Madam Chair, Councilman Waring, that is an excellent point, that because of COVID, we weren't able to recruit in a manner that we had in the past, but that also afforded us an opportunity to evolve as a police department. There was the reference by the judges in the previous presentation to using the digital media to get our word out, and we're doing that. We know that most of our recruits today ingest information very differently than we did over 31 years ago when I joined the department. And while there is value in having those in-person recruiting opportunities, COVID did give us the opportunity to branch out and reach more applicants in a different way. But to the point of not being able to meet in person, to show that, yes, we wear this uniform and we wear this badge, but we're much more than that. We haven't had the opportunity to do that. I will say I'm very proud, and I know Chief Williams is as well, of our staff down at the Academy and how they adapted to COVID. We used technology, working with our Information Technology Bureau and City ITS, to create the opportunity to teach as many of those classes as we could remotely so that we didn't have to shut training down. We weren't able to have as many recruits on campus at that time, but we were able to keep them training.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I'm sure no matter how efficient or effective, all that was being done on the fly, more or less. So I'm sure it wasn't the smoothest running ship in the fleet just because nobody was prepared for that. It just kind of came out of nowhere. I'm hopeful, or should I be hopeful, maybe you'll disabuse me of that notion, that maybe the numbers of recruits might go back up as you're able to get back to more of your traditional recruiting tactics? Or is that unreasonable on my part?
Madam Chair and Councilman Waring, absent hope, we're left with despair. I too am a very hopeful man. So I am hoping that we will have the opportunity to do that. In fact, we are sending some of our recruiters to Ohio for an event in November to do just that, to go in person. A group of 4 recruiters, background investigators, and a supervisor, because we've seen through our metrics that region in the Midwest is very interested in the Phoenix Police Department. Certainly as we get to this time of year, we understand why. And as it gets cooler, so we want to seize that opportunity, and that'll be our first in-person event in quite a while.
You mentioned the separations for retirements. We knew a large chunk of the force was retirement eligible. I think it's still in the 20% somewhere, 25% or something that are retirement eligible. Is that a factual statement?
Councilman, it's 28.5% as of
28.5, yeah. So, and it was higher, and so, it's not surprising over the last couple of years that people have chosen to retire. Again, given the climate, given a lot of the factors that I mentioned earlier, that is not surprising. But what is even more worrisome and troublesome to me is what you said about people who aren't retirement eligible who are choosing to leave. I assume that number is up substantially from where it would have been 5 years ago. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, Councilman, that is a fair statement. Because of the drop program, which is available for many of us that are more senior, traditionally it would be very rare for someone who was retirement eligible and had the ability to drop to not take advantage. It would be a very small percentage. What we are seeing now, as we're looking at these staffing trends, is that only roughly 30% of those who are separating are going to the fulfillment of their drop, and over 70% now are leaving for reasons other. And then they're either leaving the profession altogether or they're leaving for other agencies.
So if I had to sum it up, Madam Chair, Chiefs, I think this rises to the level of a crisis. It hasn't been reported as such in media outlets, but if it's not a crisis, maybe it's only a crisis to me, but it's going to be a crisis for all of us in very short order. I would argue that if you're retirement eligible and the job gets harder because you have fewer colleagues to go out and patrol with, your caseloads get unmanageable, you're probably more likely to retire. What you said about nobody used to, that's a lot of money that people are foregoing. Am I right? When you're not completing the drop program, that's a fair statement, correct? It's substantial, isn't it? If you don't go all the way through the process?
Madam Chair and Councilman Waring, yes, it usually is in the neighborhood of several $100,000 that our retirees are foregoing.
So just to repeat, you've got officers foregoing and the officers aren't getting rich doing their job. They're public servants. They're not rich billionaires, and one percenters. So they're foregoing hundreds of thousands of dollars, real money that they will miss so that they don't have to work for us anymore, if I had to boil it down. That is disheartening, and it's sad, and it's definitely something that should be, at the very least, eyebrow raising for everybody who pays attention to statistics. And then getting your head around people who are just walking away from the profession, that's one thing, but I don't know which is worse, that or that people are choosing that they want to work for some other department to finish out their tenure of public service. I'm not sure which is more concerning, but both are very worrisome. And again, I think it speaks to, we've got to change whatever it is we're doing right now, because whatever it is we're doing right now isn't working. And I think if we don't take action soon, we're really going to regret it. So I'll let you get on with your presentation, but I just wanted to make sure I was understanding statistics to the extent I was able. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Moving on with the presentation, I touched upon recruitment before, and I always think it's important to contextualize the information that's in front of you. So you see that we have one class that has 22 recruits that's scheduled to graduate just here in a couple of weeks. And we have another class with 17 recruits that won't graduate until February of 22. And that's assuming that the 22 and the 17 successfully pass their comprehensive final exam and all of the other requirements set forth by Arizona Peace Officer and Standards Training Board to actually get to that 39. I mentioned to you that we are averaging over 21 officers that are separating per month, so there's a net loss, and I'll get into greater detail earlier. Our next class that has been anemic in terms of recruiting to this point would start in December and not graduate until the summer of 22. In the previous slide, you saw reference to in March of 2020, we had 124 recruits in the academy. We made a conscious decision under Chief Williams' leadership, although we host a number of other agencies down at our academy, to do Phoenix-only training so that we could train our officers the right way and we could be more efficient. So we still have to train to the post-lesson plan, but then we can also train to our operations orders to ensure that our officers are coming out with the requisite skills and abilities to do the job the right way. At that time, we would start with a base of 50 officers, Phoenix recruits in each class. Usually we get in the neighborhood of 52 to 54. Now there's only 39 in the academy combined. I'm going to display a couple of graphs here, and I will also contextualize this information so that you can see it. We deliberately went back to 2016 so you could see these years. 2016, 2017, 2018, if we talk about new officers hired and sworn separations, we were a net positive of 257 officers hired. And then over the last 3 years, you see where we are projected. That was that 257 number, if you see projected with the asterisk for 2021. If we just continue on the trend that we're on right now through the first 9 months of the fiscal year, that wasn't even me factoring in the high 3 months of this fiscal year. I'm talking about calendar year. So over the past 3 years, we were projected a net loss of 376 with an overall net officer loss of 119, continuing to trend in a very alarming direction. With that, it's important for us to talk about our response to emergency calls for service. As you are probably aware, we prioritize our calls as priority 1, priority 2, and priority 3. Simply stated, that priority 1 call, which is referenced in this graph, is a crime that is occurring right now. This is somebody picking up the phone and calling 911 because there was a crime against a person or there is some criminal activity that is occurring in their presence they are witnessing. That is something that requires an immediate response by a police officer. The priority 2 and priority 3 are lesser calls, important but lesser. But focusing on that priority 1, because as Chief Williams said, we're being very victim-centric. Our trend right here shows that we will have more than 10,000 additional priority 1 calls this calendar year over last calendar year. That is a significant increase with fewer officers responding to those calls from our citizens who are in immediate need.
Chief, is the increase in the emergency calls for service similar to the normal calls for service?
Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee, interestingly, we are seeing an overall 10.8% increase in overall calls for service of all call types. What is really alarming is to see, if you look over time, over these last several years, fairly static, and at least in 3 of the last 4 years, the calls, priority 1s, have been fairly static, and then this significant jump this year. I can only theorize as a practitioner who has been here for a long time, but looking at the data, when you go back to where we were at today versus 2019, our violent crime rate is up over 16%. Violent crimes would fall in that priority 1 emergency call for service response, so it would stand to reason that there's a correlation between the increase in violent crime and that significant increase in those emergency calls for service.
May I say something, Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. One thing about, and I'll speak specifically to District 2, so we tend to have, I think that's a fair statement, correct me please if I'm wrong, a somewhat lower crime rate than the rest of the city, which is a good thing, but we're also much more spread out. So as you lose officers, even if we have a lower crime rate, you could still feel less safe because you have fewer officers that, I mean, you can only drive long distances so fast. So if you're coming from the Black Mountain precinct and you got to drive all the way down Tatum or something to get to something at Tatum Ranch or Desert Ridge, whatever, it's going to take however long it takes to drive that, you know, however fast you can do it safely. So as these numbers continue to drop, I'd just like to let it be known that I will fight against, I understand you want to send the officers where there are higher crime rates. I understand that. But it's not fair to do that at the expense of areas that are more spread out where people accept the same level of service. Because these response times, I'd be curious to see them broken out by district. Even if there's more crime and people have more cases to respond to, sometimes that might be offset in the northern part of the city with the long distances that people have to travel. So I'd be curious to see that broken out because it may not what people might expect. And please correct me if I'm saying anything that's not true, Councilman, and so forth. It's just something that I'm curious about and would like to see broken out in the future and also adjusted for as you guys try to make plans to adjust for having fewer officers.
Madam Chair, Councilman Waring, that's something that we can definitely do. And a little further on in the presentation, I will talk about the way we deploy resources within the patrol division, and geography being a very small part of that. But you speak to a reality that when somebody picks up the phone and they call 911, they don't want an excuse. They don't want to hear that it's just they're a long way away. They have that expectation that a police officer is going to be there, and Chief Williams and I have that same expectation.
Yes, and they have a right to that expectation, and I appreciate you acknowledging that. And just because of they happen to live in an area that has a lot of state trust land, and so by definition, the way the city maps out the precincts more spread out, that expectation should not be diminished, and it's certainly not diminished by myself or my office. I also speak about the homicides, the violent crime. Chief Kurtenbach, you and I had spoken about this. I've spoken about that. I don't know if I've ever spoken about it with Chief Williams, but I've spoken about it with her predecessors about the trends in violent crime since, say, the 1980s. I'm a product of the 1980s myself, so I'm old. It used to be you solved a lot less of the violent crimes than you do now as a percentage, but there used to also be, my understanding, a lot more violent crimes, particularly per capita. And then changes were made to laws and so forth in the 90s. And as you indicated, we hired more officers, and violent crimes, my understanding, dropped dramatically. Now here we are revisiting some of these issues, I don't believe in a positive way, and we have way fewer officers, and lo and behold, violent crime is going back up. Well, people forget, I live here too. I'm a taxpayer here too. So I want us focused on these issues, and I don't want us moving away from any of the policies that we used to reduce what, when I was growing up in the 80s, was a big problem. You didn't go necessarily to downtown areas, and feel necessarily safe about it, and with the crime rates that were out. And now, that had changed. I wouldn't want that to change back. So I certainly hope that's going to be taken into consideration as well. And if you have a response, that's great. If you feel like I misinterpreted statistics from memory, then also correct me on that. But I'd be interested in your thoughts if you have any.
Madam Chair, Councilman Waring, you're not misstating the past. And in fact, a little later on in the presentation, I'm going to provide some more data about homicides, our clearance rates, and I'm going to talk about some incidents that have happened very recently here that will further contextualize the drain on our resources and our investigators.
Chief,
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Waring. I just have one more comment, I guess, or question. So, based on this slide, the numbers you're showing is that we're anticipating 10,000 more emergency calls, I guess priority 1 calls for service with 200 less officers, correct?
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Speaking very directly to that issue is the impact on response times. Over the years, you may recall that our goal many, many years ago was to respond to all priority 1 calls for service within 5 minutes. As the city has gotten bigger, as our population has grown, and now as our resources, our sworn resources have diminished, you can see we are not meeting that goal. But once again, when we talk about direct impacts of hiring as of today, if you look at the previous 5 years, and these are calendar years, we were remaining relatively static. I'm not saying it's something to be particularly proud of, but relatively static. And then this year, with the increase in those emergency calls for service and fewer officers, we've seen now a 22-second increase in our median response time to these calls. I will maintain that 22 seconds is a significant amount of time if somebody is on the phone, if somebody is in need. If you think of a baby not breathing, you think of a violent crime victim who is in need of services, and our officers that carry individual first aid kits with them and tourniquets that can stabilize a patient before the fire department rolls in. Every second matters, and 22 seconds is quite significant. Refreshing everybody's memories regarding population. We all know that based on the most recent census that Phoenix is the 5th largest city in the United States and the fastest growing big city. If you just go back to 2020 to today, we have over 200,000 more residents than we had back then, which is a significant increase in our city, and also requires us to police differently, and it's going to require us to think differently as we continue to lose additional resources. And so, Madam Chair and Councilman Waring, this here is where I'm going to talk specifically about homicides, and I'm going to talk about clearance rates. So you may recall that last year we hit 200 homicides as a city, which was the most homicides that we had had as a city since 2007. I did say that right, 2007. And we are trending this year, we were, through the end of September, to match that. Well, let's talk about what happened just this past week, the week that just ended on Monday morning. We had 10 homicides in the city of Phoenix alone last week. We had 9 additional shootings that happened in the city last week. This morning, you may have seen reports that we had a shooting down in the area of 7th Avenue and Baseline with nearly 100 rounds fired from multiple weapons to include handgun and at least 1 rifle. 3 shooting victims down at that scene. By the grace of God, no deaths to this point. In the area of 30th Street and Roosevelt, our investigators are out there right now where we have a young juvenile who was shot and not expected to survive as well. These aren't anecdotes. These are incidents that are happening in our city right now which are driving these numbers. What I am very proud of, and I know Chief Williams is as well when we talk about clearance rates, is that when we look at FBI statistics from 2019, the clearance rates for homicide nationwide tend to be around 61%. We as a department here in 2021 are at nearly 84%, 83.9 to be exact, which I think speaks volumes about the meticulous nature with which our civilian and our sworn professional staff go out there and investigate each and every one of these crimes.
Madam Chair, may I ask a question to that point?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So in conversations with both Chief Williams' predecessors, Chief Yonner and Chief Garcia, I think both indicated, now Chief Garcia was from Dallas, but it's a similarly sized city. What I recollect from my conversations with them was they're from the 80s. They both started in the early 80s, mid 80s. I think Chief Yonner was 1985. I think he said you used to have now this was talking to him 6-7 years ago, so based on the more 146 homicides per year. But he said more or less you used to have double the homicides in a city that was half the size. So you had a rate that was, I'm not expecting you guys to know off the top of your heads, but one thing that they pointed out, both chiefs, because I asked them both about technology, was I think the clearance rates, which is exactly what Chief Kurtenbach was talking about, were I think under 40%. So you had a lot more homicides and the clearance rates were a lot less. You didn't have DNA. You didn't have all these video cameras everywhere. You didn't have the technology. And frankly, modern policing is a relatively new innovation as these things go, kind of like modern medicine. So practice really helps. So now you're telling me, they told me at the time they were disappointed if we weren't clearing you guys were clearing 80% of the cases. Now you're telling me, I think you just said 84.8 or something. So that is something that the public should look to. We're probably still having fewer homicides, my guess, per capita than we were in the 80s. And you're clearing dramatically more of those cases, almost double the percentage of cases. You can check that to verify my facts, but this is something that I'm fairly certain will be borne out by the stats. So that is good news, but what we don't want is to see the number of homicides go up, because if you're the victim of one of them, none of this does you any good at all. Just like the chief said about the response times going up 22 seconds. I once heard I think it was a baseball announcer say, minor surgery, because they always talk about athletes having minor surgery. Minor surgery is something that happens to somebody else. When you're having surgery, it's a big deal. Well, 22 seconds isn't a big deal to me right now as I'm blowing 22 seconds of your time saying this. But 22 seconds is a big deal if you've got some maniac with a gun loose in your house or something. So again, that's something to consider. But anything that pushes this number up, anything that takes us back to the 80s is a bad thing. And this trend line should be very concerning to anybody who's watching this at home. Thank you, if it wasn't obvious already.
Moving on in the presentation, I had mentioned that I want to talk about the work that our detectives do, and I want to talk about their caseloads, because this speaks to the ability to provide quality service, customer service to victims of crime. So over here on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see the average caseloads in 2020 for our detectives in 4 categories. So I specifically picked 3 person crimes and 1 property crime. And then over here on the right, you can see the recommendation from the Matrix Consulting Group on what those caseloads should be. So just reading them, so everybody has this information. Our assaults detectives get on average 56 cases per month. Matrix, a very reputable consulting group who's consulting for us right now on our growth areas in the northwest portion of the city on how we should staff, the average should be 8. Burglary, look at the disparity, 169 versus 15. Domestic violence, a very personal crime that generally involves a known suspect that requires follow-up, 66 versus 15. And then the heinous crime, when we talk about adult sex crimes, 21 versus 8. And I'd mentioned to you before, and I'm going to get into greater detail here in just a bit about specialty patrol, the only way that we can ensure that we have enough officers on the street, and I would say we're not even at enough, that we get more officers out on the street, is to take these detectives from these details and others, put them in uniform 1 to 2 weeks at a time, and send them out to patrol so they can respond to calls for service, which is also impacting their caseloads. So, Madam Chair and Councilman Waring, this formula really speaks to the point that you brought up before, but it's important for everybody to understand how we deploy our patrol resources. This formula was revised. I was part of that effort prior to 2010 when we opened the then Estrella Mountain and Black Mountain precincts to ensure that we were deploying our resources as efficiently and effectively as possible. Going back to November of 2008, when we had that 3388, this wasn't nearly as challenging of a process when we talk about the lower parts of the formula in terms of we had more resources to deploy. But understand, first and foremost, we're driven, 43% of this is by citizen-generated calls for service. That's somebody picking up the phone and calling 911. I mentioned the 10 homicides last week. I mentioned 2 crime scenes that we're working today. That's why violent crime accounts for 21% of that formula, because that requires a significant number of resources. And then going down in order, the arrests, property crimes, collisions, population, and geography. But Councilman Waring, your point is very well taken, that just because you choose to live in a certain part of the city as a taxpayer within that part of the city, I'm someone who lived in the Ahwatukee area for 3 decades, you still have the expectation to that quality customer service and that prompt response time. But this is the formula that we utilize to deploy our resources within the patrol division today.
Chief, do you believe that the formula used to develop the 1096 is still relevant today based on what the city is facing?
So, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee, I get accused sometimes of hitting the Wayback Machine just because I've been here a long time, but being here a long time gives me the virtue of perspective. So Chief Garcia, who was referenced earlier by Councilman Waring, put me in charge of redrawing the city back in 2014. At that time, we had 8 police precincts. We were losing officers at a very alarming rate. We went from that 3388 all the way down to 2,677 actual filled sworn positions. So we knew that we couldn't deploy in the manner that we were at that time. In fact, if we really want to talk about how we've deployed, in 2010, August of 2010 is when we opened Estrella Mountain and Black Mountain. In January of 2013, as we were losing resources, we did a rebid within the patrol division to reallocate resources. And then November of 14 was when I was directed to redraw the entire city. And that's how we came up with that formula, which would ensure that 55% of our uniformed available officers are in patrol. We want to maintain a minimum of that 55%, which got us to that 1096. 1096 is merely meant to be the floor. That's the basement. And I just mentioned to you that we're 42 below that floor. We had intended to, by the time we got to 3125, that 1096 would be 1286. That was always our intent. Unfortunately, we never got there. I think the formula is a valid formula. Matrix is looking at our formula and is going to provide input on whether or not it makes sense today. But I believe 1096 is a bare minimum number, which unfortunately we cannot meet as of today.
Thank you.
Councilman Waring referred to this workload map. Some people refer to it as a hotspot map. So going back to this slide where you see the way the workload is divided up within patrol, that's how you get to this workload map, which shows that the greatest amount of work citizen-generated calls for service, violent crime, the arrest, the property crime, everything that you saw is here, concentrated generally along the I-10 and I-17 corridors. The green areas, those are residents with the city of Phoenix that don't necessarily have the same level of crime, which is, as we've discussed at this point, we must be mindful of ensuring that we have adequate resources in those areas. I think Matrix is going to help us with that as we look at the north, particularly northwest and northeast portions, because we need to ensure that if we have fewer officers, we at least have them deployed out of an area that is close to their area of responsibility. In 2014, when we redrew the city, we fundamentally changed that paradigm by keeping our officers as close to the area of responsibility, regardless of where the work is. And that's something that we strive to do as we continue to grow.
Chief, which districts show the most significant increase in homicides and then robberies?
So when we talk about where the crime is occurring, mostly what you see there in the core tends to be in council districts 4, 5, 7, and 8 predominantly. You get some into 3, looking at the workload that's right there, but specifically answering your question, that's where we see those crimes occurring.
Thank you.
And this is going into a little bit more detail about what I mentioned earlier about our specialty patrol program, taking our specialty units, our detectives, away from their duties and sending them out to respond to those calls for service, helping our patrol officers. And also, this isn't all a bad thing. I think it's important for our detectives who maybe haven't been in a blue suit for a while to go out and see what our patrol officers are facing every day, and also have there be an opportunity for knowledge transfer from some of our senior detectives to our junior officers. When I came on, we still had detectives who were in the precincts, and there was an opportunity to learn from the detectives and have the detectives reach out to officers to conduct follow-up. So we are seeing a corollary benefit by having this program, but make no mistake, they're being taken away from other duties. And what we had to do, because we don't have body-worn cameras and we don't have tasers for every one of our officers, we had to ensure that we equip them with the training and the equipment to go back out on the street to do their jobs the right way. So we did provide refresher training for some of our employees who've been on the street for a while or off the street for a while, and we also gave them the equipment that they needed to do their jobs effectively. Last slide, I promise. There are 4 bullets here, some additional considerations. So we're not going to come to you, Chief Williams or I, with a series of problems without proposing some potential solutions. Earlier in the agenda, you approved a consent item, a partnership with Arizona State University to identify calls for service that may not necessarily warrant a police response. ASU as a partner will help us do that. We've done some initial analysis internally. ASU is already working on that. What I will say that as a cautionary tale is that then the decision has to be, is somebody else going to handle these calls, or is a decision going to be made that these calls are no longer going to get a response from anybody? The next item, with your support and with the support of city management, is to continue civilianized positions and to reallocate sworn personnel. So what I mean by this is, if we don't have the ability to bring new recruits through the door, then we need to look internally at ways we can get our limited sworn officers into sworn officer duties. This past year in the budget, you approved the civilianization of our central booking detail. That allows 4 sergeant positions and 18 officers to be reallocated elsewhere in the department. We are looking at other positions where we can do just that. If you think of our police assistants, we have police assistants that provide a number of functions. We have police assistants that work in the precincts. We would like many more, because they can go out and they can take those non-injury accidents. They can respond to that burglary or that theft call that will allow then our report calls, that will then allow our sworn officers to respond to those priority 1 and priority 2 calls.
Madam Chair, can I say something to this? Oh, well, it's popping up on the screen. So I guess I'll just say this, Chief, in a separate concept or separate conversation from this, you and I sort of wandered into this territory. I was hoping that you could make a concerted effort to rehire folks who had retired either on a part-time basis, help them offset their healthcare costs and so forth. Happily, you told me that you were already working on just such a plan. I could see the person, a lot of the retirees are in their probably late 40s, early 50s. So they certainly wouldn't want to necessarily just be completely retired for the rest of their lives. So I would hope that maybe after a year or two of separation, they may find parts of the job that they found enjoyable and want to come back and do those tasks to benefit the community, also benefit themselves potentially financially in some way, without having to, go through the whole training and so forth. You already have their work histories, so they've already been thoroughly vetted. It looks like from what just popped up on the screen that you're going to talk about that right now. I thought it might make sense to do it within civilianized positions, and you apparently thought the same. But can you talk a little bit about what you're planning? Because I cannot emphasize enough how much I think you should try to utilize that, because you get an experienced workforce immediately that's ready to go from day one, as opposed to pitting people through the academy where some drop out and they got to have a training period and they're not the most experienced officers. I just think this is an excellent way to offset at least some of the responsibilities that the current officers have. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Councilman Waring, yes, I will elaborate. Under City Manager Barton's leadership and his blessing, we are exploring doing just this. We've worked with city law and we've worked with city HR to designate a civilian police investigator classification that is going to follow the process and is scheduled to come before you in November. I believe it's November 17th agenda for further discussion. And that's where we want to start. We have a lot of talent that we have developed in-house on the Phoenix Police Department that they retire and they go work for other entities because they're not done. We have a number of our retirees who leave and transition as career officers into our reserve program, some of whom just have a love for the job and the uniform. But here's another reality, is that healthcare is very expensive. And when you talk about family healthcare plans, depending on which you want, it can be upwards of $2,000 a month. So you're seeing our retirees come back and work for either other agencies, taking all of that knowledge with them, so we lose it here, or becoming reserve officers where they do not get paid, but what they do have the benefit of being able to do is work off-duty jobs. So they're working their reserve time for free, then they're working off-duty jobs to help defray the cost of health care or whatever other costs they may have in their personal lives. What this would allow us to do is bring that institutional knowledge back to the department. After a separation that is required by PSPRS and IRS guidelines, a minimum of 6 months, which is probably a good thing. Take a break, refresh, go on vacation, do whatever you need to do, but it isn't so long that you haven't lost that skills. And then I think about what I've been talking about. I've been talking about homicide. I've been talking about some scenes that our detectives are working today along with our lab folks. So I need a case agent to respond to that scene. I need somebody to do the witness interviews out on that scene. I need detectives that are physically there, but I could use a retired homicide detective or a retired skilled investigator back in the office to do a lot of behind-the-scenes work that would free up our detectives to do those things that require a heavier lift. That's what this would allow us to do. And then as we grow, assuming that we can show that this actually is productive and it helps, recognizing that in the short term it will add to the overall budget, that isn't lost on me. Then there are other areas of the department that we would seek to civilianize. Do we need to have sworn background investigators in our Employment Services Bureau? Maybe yes, maybe no. Other agencies have non-sworn. But if they're retirees, they cost a lot less than our fully sworn do today. When we talk about training, do we need to have current sworn police officers that are down at the academy teaching firearms or other classes? Not necessarily. So we're looking at the opportunity to expand this, again, with the backdrop, if we are not able to bring recruits in, we still have a duty to provide service. How do we provide that service? And we believe the rehiring of retirees as civilian employees would allow us to do that. And then the last bullet for the presentation, and then the final slide is just questions, is to continue to explore alternative and innovative staffing models to maximize service to the community. And let me explain what that means. I wasn't trying to be artful in what I said. As we continue to get leaner, and Chief Williams and City Manager Barton and I are preparing that we are going to lose additional resources, we have literally evaluated every position on the department. And every job is important, make no mistake, and we value every member of our organization and what they do. But Chief Williams, at the beginning of this presentation, laid out what our core functions are and what are mission-critical jobs. That's somebody receiving that call for service, that call for service being dispatched and an officer responding, an officer investigating that call for service, and let's assume that there's a suspect at the end of that, and then holding to account whomever is responsible for that criminal activity. That's why through that evaluation, we're evaluating every job and perhaps reallocating resources to positions of greater need.
So, Madam Chairwoman, members of the subcommittee too, let's also keep in mind the CAP program that we are hopeful that will mitigate some of the calls for service that the blue suits are going on. So we just wanted to make sure that we package that as well. Thank you.
And that concludes
Thank
the
you.
presentation.
Thank you so much. Do you have?
Madam Chair, could I ask a few questions?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So I would just say to the chiefs, the slide that you just showed is a good way to, I don't want to say paper over because I think that does it a disservice. The real problem, though, as I see it, the real crisis is recruiting new officers who will be with us for 25 or 30 years and putting them through the academy, training them up right, and getting them out in the street. If that doesn't happen, I'm chair of the Human Trafficking Task Force, and I know in the past there's been discussion about is there still going to be dedicated officers focusing on that horrible, egregious crime that frankly impacts kids disproportionately. Is that still going to be around? Or are they going to be out in the street answering calls? I would say that the community action officers, I've had worries from the district I represent where people are worried that is that program going to go away? Are those officers going to go away because they're going to have to be out responding to calls so you can keep the response times at some sort of unacceptable but within at least some standards level. So the only way around it that I can see is to get more people into the program. Last month, there was a discussion about recruiting veterans. I think veterans are about 25% of the force. Is that a fair analysis?
Madam Chair and Councilman Waring, yeah, it's close to 25% of the department. That is correct.
So I would just say if we went down a path where we weren't emphasizing veterans as much, that's 25% of the current workforce. So obviously that has been a rich pool of people who have wound up in the department. I would certainly want to encourage you to try to recruit more veterans, not fewer. College grads make up what percentage? I don't know if you heard the question. What percent do college grads make up of the force?
Madam Chair, Councilman Waring, it's an equitable percentage between the two, and although they are not mutually exclusive, it tends to be between 20 and 25% of our current workforce have military experience. The same have four-year college degrees, and then a smaller percentage, about 5, have both. 5%.
I mean, most of our recruits do not have college degrees and are also not veterans because, like you said, there's some overlap. So that brings me, I would strongly encourage us not to just focus on college grads because that's been a smaller percentage and might be tougher to get. It's also probably more expensive to recruit them, I would imagine, because they'll have more earning potential than people without college degrees. I think every statistic you'll ever see will bear that out. So, we're already struggling to keep up salaries with surrounding cities and other states. I would imagine, diversity is something I care about as well. The department isn't as diverse as it could be. I would imagine, just guessing, that the armed forces is, I don't know if it's as diverse as the city of Phoenix is, but I imagine it's pretty doggone diverse. That's my guess. College graduates, I'd be surprised if that pool of potential applicants will be as diverse as the city of Phoenix is as a whole, population-wise. So that's something to consider as well. So I don't want you to see you take in any policies that might limit the pool of applicants when we're struggling in this current climate to get enough applicants to even fill the spots. We're actually failing in that effort. I'm not criticizing you for your efforts. You're doing what you can, but certainly that's something that should be considered, which takes me to the next point. Are our standards in terms of background checks and so forth too rigorous? Now, I thought I'd be the last person who might bring this up, but I'll just give an example because I don't know. Obviously, the standards on marijuana use have changed. And I don't know if the background checks have kept up with that. Anybody who's been through the FBI background check knows that it's very drug intensive. And I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong, but we're facing a crisis. I would say, I don't know how you count DUIs. Obviously, that's been an issue with the department before. But I would also say if you get a DUI when you're 20, and I did the anti-DUI bills at the legislature with the tough laws and so forth, so this is something I know something about. It doesn't necessarily mean anything other than you made a mistake one time, and should we really be punishing that person by not hiring them when they're 26? Certainly should not be interpreted as like there's a hardened criminal and we can't put them out in the street as a police officer. So I don't necessarily expect you to speak to like what you could do, but it might be something that you'd want to consider. And Madam Chair, I'd ask people to bring that back, the chief and the chiefs to bring that back, like what might be possible that seems reasonable to make it so people that we are maybe de facto excluding might have an opportunity now to become an officer at a time when we need officers.
Madam Chair,
Thank you,
Councilman Waring, if I may, let me just address that point. So we went from January of 09 to March of 15 and we did not hire. In March of 15 was when we began hiring, and I was a brand new assistant chief that Chief Yonner put in charge of our hiring and our training program. One of the first things I did was meet with our background investigators and try to understand why our standards, Phoenix standards, were more rigorous than state standards. Because remember, we are governed by the Arizona Peace Officer Standards and Training Board. We can't go below their standards. But at that time, the belief was, well, we're Phoenix, so we should have a higher standard. With Chief Yonner's blessing, I challenged our BIs, our background investigators, and they're doing that today. I said, I trust your judgment as investigators. I want to increase the pool that come through the door, and let's evaluate who they are and their ability to learn from past transgressions. In fact, I looked at one of our supervisors back then who had a very rigorous philosophy, and I said, and this is pretty close to the quote to that sergeant, I said, based on your standards, you wouldn't have hired me, and I turned out okay. And I think that's an important point. So we are doing that. We recognize, and I'm not saying this to be coy, but the valedictorian is easy and the felon is easy in terms of the process, but there's a lot that's in the middle. But make no mistake that we hire based on post standards. In marijuana, laws have changed. Post is beginning to adapt, but some may argue, this isn't my position, I'm a rule follower, that's my job, that those standards haven't evolved enough. But we are looking at the complete person, and because somebody makes a mistake as a 19-year-old, depending on the degree of that mistake, doesn't mean that they can't be a police officer when they're 30 years old. Earlier than that even, I'm just trying to highlight a point.
Madam Chair,
Thank you so much.
may I
Chief.
just interject? Thank you, ma'am.
Yes.
The councilman spoke about the community action officers, and having been at a number of community meetings over the last 2 weeks, our community members are making it very clear that they crave and desire that connection with the community action officers. So as we move forward with different options to come back to present to you all, we're definitely keeping that as part of the equation because we know that connection is very important to our community members. Thank you.
Thank you for that response, Chief. I do know that our community members are often very close to their CAOs, and it's an important aspect to our community policing. So thanks for keeping their input in mind. And with that, I will go to Councilwoman, and sorry.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you, Chiefs. I had the opportunity, as you know, to do a ride-along with the Phoenix Police Department in the Maryvale Estrella precinct. That was on September 29th. In the 2 hours that I was there, I think I got at least a small glimpse of what you've described to us, and had a good sense of seeing the dashboard and the over 20 calls that were waiting, and got to see the response time. So definitely recognize the crisis. Obviously, the first question in that moment is just what can be done in this moment? How do we address this? And I'm very intrigued by the ASU study. And since we didn't get to hear more about it, I guess I'm wondering if you could tell a bit more about it. And I'm wondering, is there a proposed scope of research? Are we looking at the entire city or just certain districts? And what are your expectations of what potential policy recommendations that will bring?
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Ansari, this isn't limited to certain districts. This is the entire city. And this is the way for us to more effectively examine how we deploy. You may have seen that there are other jurisdictions that have made the decision to only respond to priority calls for service, what we would call a priority one. We're not there yet. Neither Chief Williams nor I want to get there, and I pray that we don't. But to ensure that we don't, or at least to the extent that we can ensure that we don't, let's evaluate some of those call types, which ASU is going to do, that drain a significant number of resources that perhaps could be better suited for other entities, or ultimately we make policy decisions that we just don't go. Chief Williams talked about CAP. I think CAP is going to have a significant impact once fully implemented. I've said this before. I said this as recently as last month sitting at this table, that I recognize that this blue suit isn't calming in certain circumstances, but I also want to make sure that our community understands that if we don't respond, somebody is going to respond to a call, and that's what ASU is going to help us with. So it will quantify to the extent it's possible. You hear me qualify those types of things. How many FTEs does it take to respond to certain call types over time? And if they weren't responding to that, could they be doing other things? But it's a very holistic approach to addressing our staffing crisis, has been very clearly stated, in addition to civilianization, in addition to bringing retirees back, in addition to redeploying existing assets, to look at it as completely and wholly as we can.
Okay, great. Thank you. Looking forward to that. I also had a question about salaries. I know, in a lot of different industries, we've been talking about workforce challenges as well. So I guess, it's somewhat encouraging that it's not just in the police department. We have workforce challenges everywhere. And I know salaries can play a big role there. So I'm wondering, do you know, how do we compare to our neighboring jurisdictions when it comes to salaries? And have we considered any sort of, I know we have the hiring bonuses, but have we considered higher salaries to be able to recruit officers?
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Ansari, I do actually have that information. Looking at 12 jurisdictions here in the Valley, including MCSO, in terms of salary, strictly salary, which was your question, we're third from the bottom. Whether or not that is something that draws people to the Phoenix Police Department, that's an individual decision. You have to look at total compensation in addition to salary in and of itself. I know that was something that was important to me as a young father on the department, but specific to your question, we are third from the bottom.
And Councilwoman,
so are you suggesting that we're... go ahead. Sorry.
If I may, those are the questions and the types of things that we've discussed over the years during labor negotiations as well. And just again, to what Chief Kurtenbach said, we typically try to look at the total compensation level because there are certain benefits and packages that we offer that other jurisdictions don't. And it's hard to do an apples to apples comparison when you're just looking strictly at salary. And so that's one of the things that HR has always focused on in terms of total comp. Where do we fall relative to other jurisdictions? And we are currently going through a total compensation study right now. HR is doing that on all city classifications. It's about a year-long process, and it is anticipated that many of our classifications, not just the sworn ones, but all classifications across the city, are expected to be lifted up throughout that process as a result of that class and comp study.
Got it. Okay, thank you so much, Jeff. And then my final point was more just a point and not a question, but just want to echo the point around community action officers. I know that in my district and probably everywhere, they're highly, highly valued and work super closely with the block watches and with the neighborhood leaders. And I know you're making some very tough decisions, but I hope that we can at least maintain that program, just given the trust that those individuals have been able to build with the community. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Councilwoman. All right.
Madam Chair, can I ask a couple more questions? Thank you. To that end, I was happy to hear about the community action officers because that I hadn't had a chance to talk with either of the chiefs about that specifically. I brought up human trafficking, but there are quite a few more specialized programs. I guess it might be helpful, if not today, then at some point, if this trend continues, because I just fear, at what point are we down to 2,000 officers and you're just scrambling to respond to calls? I mean, if you're looking at these trend lines, it's devastating. And I don't know what the, crisis or however you want to phrase it, I'm not sure how to address that because you won't be able to ramp up and get, even if people suddenly started to flood the department with applications, you wouldn't be able to get them out in the street fast enough or have enough supervisors to train them up well enough to get them out and deployed. So if some of these apocalyptic scenarios come to pass, maybe it might be helpful, if not today, then in the future, like what programs that are currently available to citizens would be on the chopping block. And then also precinct redistribution. I know Chief Kurtenbach, you said you worked on that last time. Obviously, I have a huge precinct in Black Mountain Precinct geographically. I mean, it stretches, across much of North Phoenix. Desert Horizon is not small either. When you look at it on a map and when you consider the activity that happens there and the space and the traffic that officers would have to fight through to get to calls, I just would want to know how I or citizens can participate, because to my comments earlier about geography impacting response times, where your precinct is also affects response times and who, is responding to those calls. So I definitely want to be able to participate in that. And I do not want to see North Phoenix be shortchanged, despite the fact that we have a lower crime rate than the central and southern part of the city. Thank you.
Madam Chair and Councilman Waring, if I can address that, we will be very transparent in how we move forward. Back in 2014, as part of that process, I personally conducted 12 community meetings around the city. It was me, not somebody else, so that nothing would get lost in translation. We're going to follow a similar model because we believe that collective wisdom will help us get to the best result. So we will share information. As I said, I've been a practitioner for a long time, but what was very valuable for me as I went all over the city was to learn what unique needs there were throughout the city and to adapt our deployment model accordingly. So you have that commitment from Chief Williams and I that not only will we brief you and your staffs, and we will have very transparent and open conversations here in this forum, but we will take that information out to the community as well, and we'll use social media and other tools to glean information from folks who aren't able to attend in-person meetings.
So, Madam Chairwoman, Chief Williams again, to Councilmember Waring's statement, you heard the Chief say that you have our commitment. You don't just have our commitment, but you have the city manager's commitment that we're going to run through several options on this before making any hard decisions and changes. We learned in 2017, if I'm not mistaken, the importance of the human trafficking unit, and if you go back to our focus, it's victim-centric. So we know that there are going to be some things that we're going to have to adjust and learn, but there's no way we're going to make any changes without input of you all as well as our community members. Thank you.
And I appreciate that, Chief. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I will say there are no good alternatives in this current situation / climate. Until, and it should be known to citizens who are watching this, there's a budget authorization for about 3,200 officers right now, correct? Isn't that the number, pretty close to it?
3,125, Councilman.
Okay, 3,100 and change. It would be fantastic if we could fill those spots. They're not fillable right now. We can't make people apply. We have to make this a more attractive job. That was why my comments about not potentially recruiting veterans maybe as much as we are or at all, and focusing too much on college graduates make up a pretty relatively smaller part of the pie when it comes to our hiring. We got to go to where qualified applicants are. This will be a controversial thing that I'm going to bring up here. I don't know what potential plans are for mandatory vaccines for officers, but anything, obviously, I'm sure there are hundreds of officers who aren't vaccinated. I personally would rather have an unvaccinated officer show up if there's some maniac with a gun at my house than not have any officer available, or they get there so late that it doesn't matter. But regardless, I would certainly hope that if any of that comes up in the future, just please reflect on the impact that that might have on recruitment and might have on officer retirements. Maybe it won't have any, but I'd be surprised if that's the case, given the national conversation that's being had about this. And just please try to look at it, if we lose more officers, are people really safer than they would be than if the non-vaccinated person was going out? Nobody seems to look at it that way. Right now, we're in desperate straits for officers. And as you illustrated in various slides, I have concerns that, these violent crimes going up, those are real life situations today, right now, right this second, that are not going to be addressed in a timely fashion, really right now, much less in the future. So it's just something to consider as you go forward. And I think it's anything that impedes hiring at this point should be looked at with strict scrutiny. And so I just want to say that. I don't know if you have any response to that, but it's certainly something that I think you should consider. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, Councilman Waring. Vice Mayor Garcia.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you, Chiefs, for presenting this. I do think going down this path of a little bit of fear tactics or a situation where we're not recognizing other problems in the police department. We've obviously been in the media and the newspaper. The Department of Justice is here, and I think we also need to take serious where the profession has gone and other issues and reasons why folks aren't hiring or aren't wanting to be officers, aren't applying. I do recognize the CAP program is a really exciting program. I think a lot of the calls are going to be taken from you all. I do think we've gotten to a place where there's too much on officers' plates. We've had to settle settlements because officers were being dog catchers, because officers were doing things that they shouldn't be doing. So I do think there's a responsibility on ourselves to look at what we can take off officers' plates so they can take care of those numbers. I also think we need to look at the pandemic and what's happened. And I also want to remind folks that there could be one point of view of why those hotspots are in districts 4, 7, 5, and 8. And the other point of view, which is my point of view, is that those districts lack resources, lack the ability for folks to better themselves. And so I think there's that conversation we must have. And so I guess the questions I have for you all, for the chiefs, as you're making these decisions, for whatever reason, folks aren't wanting to be police officers. You could blame it on people trying to hold them accountable or have them be more transparent, or you can blame it on folks just don't want to be officers anymore. The profession's not what it used to be. But what are other things that you have heard, both of why officers are leaving or why they're not wanting to come on board? And then the other question I have about rehiring officers, I know seeing a lot of our practices in the past of officers leaving before they could be held accountable. Wondering, I know Brady List wouldn't apply here, especially when a lot of officers leave before they're investigated. What kind of standards are we going to hold folks to as we rehire them, especially with folks that had a pending investigation that might have left before they went through any process?
Madam Chair and Vice Mayor Garcia, so let me go to your first question as to the why people are leaving. And it's a very personal decision, and it's varied. We conduct exit interviews with every employee who is willing. We don't force them to, but we ask a series of questions to try and glean why. We also, as part of that, there's a board that I sit on that does a company that does stay interviews. So we're trying to do that as well. Because by the time you get to the point that somebody is leaving, generally you've lost them. We're not going to change their minds anymore, but that can help us with others. So we're hearing two predominant reasons why people are leaving. Number one is that they don't want to do this job anymore. One of the reasons they say they don't want to do this job anymore is they feel this lack of support. And that's, again, a very personal decision. Is that lack of support something that they don't feel from us? Is that something that they don't feel from elected officials? It's all over the place in what they say. But I'm being very honest with you, and you will always get that candor from me. The other is, and part of that is why they leave for other agencies. You made a comment last month that perhaps, I don't believe you mentioned this to be factual, but perhaps they're leaving because they don't want to be part of this department. That because they don't feel that this department's philosophies or beliefs comport with their personal beliefs. We haven't heard that from anybody who has left. They've left for personal reasons. Other agencies, whereas previously I mentioned we didn't have a problem recruiting against other agencies because people wanted to come to Phoenix. We're the biggest, there's the most opportunity. We have some agencies who have gotten very clever and they offer take-home vehicles. They offer the ability for somebody to not work third shift patrol, which I did for 7 years of my career, and they actually then can be detective early on, be a motor officer early on. They're getting very clever in how they recruit. But these decisions that we're hearing really are either I don't want to be in the profession anymore, or I don't want to be in this profession for this department for a variety of personal reasons. And also when it comes to recruiting, there is a lot of opportunity that's out there for especially college educated or folks that go into the trades where they can make just as much, if not more money with very little risk, personal risk. And I'm not talking about physical risk. We all take on risk anytime we get in our cars and we drive to work or we get on the bus or whatever the case may be. But I'm talking the risk of potentially being sued, being arrested, whatever the case may be. Again, responding to your question. With regard to the rehiring, it's important to understand that we will hold anybody that we rehire to very rigorous standards, that if we wouldn't hire them as a sworn, we're not going to hire them as a civilian, although these are civilian positions. These actually would fall under Unit 7, so they would fall under that classification. But we're not going to let somebody walk out the door who is under investigation and then come back as a civilian and skirt the system. Chief Williams doesn't stand for that. I won't stand for that. What we do want to do is we want to get that talent that's out there that provided quality service to this community and this department and bring them back to continue to provide that service. But it will continue to be a very rigorous, thoughtful process, not one where we just have this revolving door.
You mentioned laterals or recruiting folks from other departments. What are some strategies have you thought about some of those strategies or ways? Because I know that folks wouldn't have to go to the academy. They're just coming directly from another department. What does that look like? What does that strategy look like? I don't want to say the word poach, but essentially what's happening to us.
Madam Chair, Vice Mayor, poach is actually, it's a good word. It's a fair word because yes, other agencies are doing that to us. So we are open to evaluating lateral applicants from any agency. And some, to your point, can only have to go through a minimal academy. If they are already Arizona Peace Officer certified, then they just go through some additional training. They don't have to go back to the academy. But here's what we're experiencing, Vice Mayor. We're not getting the best of the best from other agencies that are applying to Phoenix. And we're not going to hire somebody's throwaways. That's not going to happen. We don't want to inherit some other agency's cast-off that is going to cause a problem for us here. So we are continuing to maintain very high standards. When we do get that applicant, that lateral applicant that has a stellar pedigree and comes here because they want to work in the city of Phoenix for whatever reason, we are hiring that applicant. But as we've seen flight from other agencies, we're being very, very careful about whom we evaluate and who we hire here because we recognize that wearing this uniform and wearing this badge is an honor.
So, Madam Chair, to the Vice Mayor, this is Chief Williams. I think you all are aware I sit on the Arizona Peace Officer Standards and Training Board, and that board has made a lot of adjustments in selecting and picking and offering or granting certifications to individuals. So just know that at our level in Phoenix, we're really stringent. Also at the state level, we're starting to become much more stringent about who we're allowing to be a certified police officer. Also looking at previous practices in other agencies, most specifically in the state of Arizona. Thank you.
Thank you. And there was a comment about salaries earlier, and I know there's one level in which people come in, but can you speak to once folks move up, sergeants and lieutenants, what are the average that they're making? Especially, I know we saw last year a lot of overtime. What just kind of letting folks know, what can an officer actually make, especially once they move up? What do those types of salaries look like?
So, Madam Chair and Vice Mayor, that's why both I and the city manager both addressed total compensation as well. Salary is one thing, and I talked about just that little bit. I talked about being a young father on the department and health care for my kids being very important. So when you talk about the police officer classification, officers and detectives, it's the same classification, it's just a different job. They move through their steps, and then they have the opportunity to make other performance pay by getting additional certifications, being a Spanish speaker, if you will, learning how to be a drug recognition expert. So there's opportunity to make significantly more money. Some of our employees enjoy working overtime. Some are having to work overtime because we have so many vacancies. So yes, there is the starting salary that I responded to the question is lower than some of the agencies in the Valley. but there is an opportunity to move up very quickly. And then as you promote to sergeant or as you promote to lieutenant, there's the opportunity, lieutenant being the last hourly position on the department, to make very good money as well, if money is the driving force, and have the opportunity to work different assignments. To Councilman Waring's point, I guess rich is in the eye of the beholder, and that would vary depending on somebody's perspective. I don't know that anybody is going to get rich doing this job, but you certainly have the ability as an officer, sergeant, lieutenant, or beyond to provide for your family, and the city does provide tremendous benefits. I came on the department, I didn't have a degree. I was very close to finishing my degree. I finished my undergraduate and graduate degrees on the department, which is another benefit, a city benefit as well.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Madam Chair, can I ask another sort of follow-up to that point about the salaries and money?
Yes, sir.
So that's certainly what your perspective when you're 22 or 25 or 30 applying to the department. Your perspective on the long term on the salaries is one thing, but it is extremely concerning. I can't emphasize it enough that you have people who are willing to forego hundreds of thousands of dollars to retire faster than they might otherwise have expected. So obviously money isn't the driving force, and it takes me back to, and I'll just sum it up in a very impolitic way, I think we treat our officers like crap, and they recognize that fact, and they want to get out. And it sounded like from your exit interviews, Chief, that's sort of permeated things. It's bad for morale, that's bad for the citizenry, and I can't apologize to the officers enough that they've been put in this situation. So we've got to change that narrative, because that will also permeate out in the community if it hasn't already. And I believe it's affecting our recruiting. I do think maybe COVID might have had something to do with it, but certainly the last year and a half has not made it a more attractive job. And you know what? We can complain about that all we want and say, boy, I wish we want people, I wish we'd get people to want to be police officers. But really the bottom line is you got to make it an attractive job to them. You can't force them to apply. So whatever that takes, I would hope you would bring back a plan to make it a more attractive job, because rehiring the retired folks and so forth, that's fine. But at some point, there won't be anybody left to retire that we can fill in the gaps 20 years from now with retired people. You got to have retirees to make that happen. So if there are things, I don't know, pension-wise and so forth, that would make it more attractive to the younger person who might apply going forward, then we got to do what we got to do. But this current situation has the potential to be a disaster. And I just can't emphasize enough, when crime used to be much discussed in presidential elections and so forth, and then that eased off over sort of the ensuing 20 to 25 years, and now it's back again. That's not a good thing at all. Employers who might want to move here will notice this. We're not the only city who's going through this, so it is a comparison issue, but we have to get to the point where we can make this an attractive job for 22 to 40-year-olds. And I guess I'm hoping that you'll come back with a plan to make that happen. And if there's something I can personally do, I want to do it. But at least give the rest of the council and upper management a chance to say, no, we're not going to do that. We like the status quo. I don't like it, but I guess if that's the way we want to go, that's the way we want to go. But continually banging on the officers, I just think this has put us on a very dangerous path. So thank you for the indulgence. I know I talked a lot, Madam Chair, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Councilman Waring, for your comments. I just have a couple of wrap-up comments, and I would like to thank the chiefs for being here today and presenting this information in a very factual, data-driven way. I think that it's unfair to characterize it as fear tactics. Numbers are numbers, and our numbers are down, and we're not reaching a crisis, we are at a crisis. So I am thankful for you trying to find creative and innovative ways to find some short-term solutions. We obviously do need long-term solutions to bring folks to the table that want to be officers. So I would ask if you would please bring back some options to us to look at in a future meeting. In addition, I would say that the Phoenix Police Department has proven that it wants to improve and be accountable and transparent to the community, we have a lot of good men and women working for the department. So thank you again. Look forward to seeing what options we have to look at our next meeting. And with that, I would say that we are adjourned.